and welcome to Nightmares and Dreams Session 3 with our Halloween special, featuring a variety of wonderful authors who have all at some point been published through Bridget's Press. We have StephanieEllis, Katie Marie, Rae Wilde, Kev Harrison, and Catherine McCarthy. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Steph, who's going to be doing the first of our Halloween Tide readings.
Hi, I'm StephanieEllis, and I'm going to be reading from The Woodcutter, my folk horror novel. It's a story of mystery and murder set against the backdrop of the reenactment of a local legend. And the part I'm going to read is the first night of the reenactment, when 6 locals have been tied up as human scarecrows, and the woodcutter has been summoned, and they are waiting for one of them to be chosen as his apprentice. Folk horror had become big news in recent times, sparked festivals and gatherings in rural areas across the country, allowed a little of the money sloshing about in towns and cities to trickle out into the hedgerows and furrows. Little Hatchet, almost buried in the mouth of God-begone woods, had its own story, a tale more monstrous than many of its rural cousins. And that was the key to this event, the idea of it once being real. They promised chills and thrills at this gathering. Oliver had read out the summoning that morning as the sun rose behind them, and the villagers bound their limbs. When Alec heard the words, his gaze was drawn back to the woods, and try as he might, he could not look away. A cold, creeping sensation had taken hold and was with him still. It partly explained his continued non-stop talking. The old rhyme from the journal had been read prior to the summoning, a nice dramatic touch, even if it increased his strange sense of foreboding. When the worm crawls across the land and rot eats away at the heart, when decay corrupts the innocent and families are torn apart, when day is gone and night remains and no light is seen at all, it is time to call the woodcutter and allow his blade to fall. The audience had lapped it up, spent their money in the beer tent, added their names to the list of sponsors. Oliver Hayward, property developer and self-styled entrepreneur, he had a way of making money, the Midas touch. And so here they were, the 6 of them, bound to crosses on the Little Hatchet skyline, 6 human scarecrows, waiting for the woodcutter, the monster from Fred and Vinny's resurrected fairy tale. 3 days and 3 nights they had to last. Would he take one of them? Would he take all? When? They'd already agreed 2 of them would disappear on the second night, an instance which would be conveniently caught on camera by those filming the night's events. A local journalist had been present, some local teens filming, ready to add to the blogs and vlogs they'd created to publicise the event. Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, Instagram, they had social media covered. The youth of the village had already decided this would be their Blair Witch moment. Oliver even opened a GoFundMe page, Save Little Hatchet, and donations had already started to trickle in. Alec recalled the words of the summoning and shuddered. Man of the woods, we offer you 6 of our finest sons. Man of wood, we offer you our children's blood and bones. Man of the woods, we call on you as nature's son of oak, to hew away the rot within, carve anew our human cloak. Alec found himself staring again at the wood, its presence hypnotizing him, its shade a deeper black than the sky above them, forming a void, dense, waiting, hungry. For a moment he felt himself tipping, sliding towards it, but the ropes held, although it seemed as if they were cutting into him. With a start, Alec realised he'd been nodding off. He'd been dreaming. A vague image remained of a tree-lined path and a little boy walking with his father, a cottage ahead and the door open. His memory, or just a dream? Soft snores and heavy breathing from the others indicated they had miraculously fallen asleep and remained so. The copious amount of alcohol offered throughout the evening had obviously done the trick. Alec envied them. He didn't want to be this aware of the shadowy world around them. He breathed in, noticing the musty, decaying tang in the air, which seemed to become more and more pronounced as the season wore on. A scraping sound reached his ears, rocking. He shook his head and the noise vanished. At least Oliver allowed comfort breaks to be factored in. Otherwise, the next few days could get very messy. "Do you really think it's just a story?" asked Andy, tied up on his left, the two of them at the end of the row. He'd been quiet for some time, and Alec thought he too had been asleep. The sound of his voice, even if it was Andy, comforted him. It took away his growing sense of isolation. "Course it is," said Alec. "Old wives' tale. Told to keep the kids in order, you know. Like the Sandman'll take your eyes if you don't go to sleep. The woodcutter'll chop off your head if you don't eat your greens or something." The two chuckled quietly, enjoying the relief of a lighter moment, until Callum at the other end of the row stirred and started to speak. Only it didn't sound like Callum, his voice deep and scratchy, and at first it seemed as if he was repeating the summoning. "Man of the woods, we offer you." "For Christ's sake, Callum, shut it," hissed Alec. "Let the others sleep." "6 of our blighted sons," he continued. "He's having a laugh," said Andy, changing the words, creepy voice. "He's trying to spook us, like always." Yeah, thought Alec. He'd got to know this group of young men, Vinny's friends, quite quickly. Bloody typical, and yet. "Man of bark, we offer you the wood of our children's bones." "Enough's enough," Callum said Alec, still hoping not to wake the others. Vinny with a hangover was not a pleasant experience at close quarters. "Man of wood, man of oak, we call on you to cleave this gift apart. Man of the woods, we give to you their guilty blackened hearts." On Callum's left, Eric stirred. "Well, what are you saying, Callum? Callum?" But Callum remained quiet. He'd appeared to have fallen asleep again. Alec considered him for a minute. He wasn't the sort to make such things up. More than likely, this was one of Oliver's little ideas, those touches, he said, he would add to the proceedings to aid authenticity. Nobody else spoke. Alec couldn't tell who was awake or who slept. He could only hear nature's nocturnal music, the hoot of a distant owl, the rustling of leaves, the sound of small creatures scurrying in the undergrowth. Eventually, even those murmurings faded away, and there was nothing except a silence more profound than anything he had ever experienced. It was like a vacuum, and it was pulling his gaze back towards God-begone woods, which seemed to have expanded, as inching step by step towards him, swallowing up the village at its edge, slithering across the fields, up towards the 6 who were bound there, a river of ink rolling over everything, consuming the world. A sleeping demon rolling over and waking up as the offering was made. Hunger pangs of an appetite long suppressed, rumbling beneath. A creature he'd once known, walking in the woods, hand in hand with his father. And that's from The Woodcutter.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Marvellous. Creepy as hell.
I aim to please.
Genuine chills there with the verses particularly.
I love writing verses and making them a little bit creepy and sort of tweaking them.
Well, you are a poet as well, aren't you?
I try to be.
I was say it shows.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's lovely.
So next up we have Catherine. So I will let you introduce your book.
Okay. Hi everyone, thank you for joining us tonight. Just wanted to point out before I start to read that the Halloween tradition in Wales was known as Nos Calan Gaeaf, which means Winter's Eve. And in my book, The WolfAndFavour, which is a dark fantasy suitable for older, middle grade, right up to adult, there's the extract I'm going to read takes place on Nos Calan Gaeaf, and it's a pivotal point in the story. Hannah, the main character, is a 10-year-old girl who has Down syndrome, and she's moved to Wales in a very old cottage, which is actually my house. I based it on my house. And behind the cottage, there's a lane that runs all the way to an old farm. In the scene I'm going to read to you, she's in the garden with the old gardener called Ellis, who's also the farmer from the top of the lane. He helps out in the garden, but he's also a wizard, or in Welsh we call it a dewin. He's warned her of the witch that's in the woods, and he's warned her not to go playing in the lane and wandering in the woods, but he's got his suspicions that she hasn't listened to him and that she has been there. So the conversation they have in the extract I'm about to read is where he's kind of testing her, really, and warning her again. So she says to him, "Why do you call Halloween the other thing?" Ellis put down the rake and leaned against the sturdy trunk of the bare beech. "Well, bach, Nos Calan Gaeaf is the old Welsh name for Halloween, see? Goes right back to pagan times." "What's pagan?" He removed his flannel cap and scratched his head. "Pagan is a belief in something other than the usual gods. Think of it like this. Me and you are doing a last tidy in your garden today 'cause the season's changing. It'll soon be winter, won't it? Nos Calan Gaeaf means first night of winter, so it's a celebration of the changing of the season. But there's also a bit of magic involved." "Ooh, I like magic." She grinned. Long ago, folk believed at this time of year the boundary between this world and the next was a bit less obvious, so it was easier to communicate with those who'd already passed on. She frowned. "What boundary?" "Like a line, a marking, like the fence around this garden or the fence in the lane, the one that separates the track from the woods. Boundaries can sometimes be seen or they can be invisible, see?" She swallowed hard, remembering the white shapes that separated the wood from the lane. "So why do we make lanterns?" "Well, let me see. Back in the olden days, people would dress up in costumes as a disguise against ghosts. They'd carve lanterns to ward off evil spirits. Here, come up by the fence and I'll tell you a bit more about the invisible boundary. You won't be able to see it in daylight." Hannah felt a bit queasy. Nevertheless, she followed him to the wire fence. "See over there?" He pointed a chubby finger, mottled with age. "Where the wood is fenced off?" She nodded. "Well, Hannah, it's a boundary, right?" "Uh-huh." "Well, Bach, what you can't see is there's also an invisible boundary running alongside it, one that can only be seen at night. If it were dark, you'd be able to see all kinds of markings on the ground, white ones. They're Celtic symbols of protection." Hannah gasped. He was definitely talking about the ghostly white markings she'd seen a few nights back when she'd been talking to the tree creature. "Does it surprise you, Bach?" Ellis said, noticing the shocked expression on her face. She gave a small nod, afraid to raise her eyes in case he read the deception there. "Remember I told you about when me and Dereth found her in the wood? The evil one who killed our dog, Morveth?" She was hardly likely to have forgotten that story, was she? In fact, she'd thought about it every day since. "Uh-huh. Those markings are how we managed to keep her there. They form a magical boundary. No wire fence would have done, not even barbed wire. She's a powerful one, all right, I tell you." He shook his head. "Sapped the strength from both of us, it did, weaving that magic. and we only had one night to do it in. How come she doesn't escape? How come they shine in the dark? So many questions, Bach. Come on, let's go sit over by the apple tree and I'll tell you about the night we trapped her. Although it hadn't rained for a few days, the grass was still too wet to sit on, so instead they plonked down on the old pig bench. The pig bench had been left in the garden by the previous owner, hardly surprising given its rotten condition. It was a wonder it held their weight. Hannah remembered asking Emrys about it during one of his first visits. He'd explained how pig benches were originally used for chopping the pig into pieces after slaughter. His explanation had horrified her, and she had refused to sit on it for some time. But it seemed a bit silly now. She still couldn't get the image of the poor pig's face out of her head, though, whenever she sat there. She shuddered. "You cold? Want to go grab a coat?" "No, it's this." Hannah pointed to the bench. "Gives me the willies." She liked the willy word, and this was one of those times when she believed she could get away with using it. Do, you have the knack of lifting my spirits." He chuckled, which made her laugh too. "Right, Bach, let's go back to where we left off last time." Hannah watched him, eager for the story to start. "'Member me telling you about her killing my Morvedd?" His eyes clouded over. "Never seen our Derith so upset. Took it hard, she did. Changed her forever, in some ways." "'Cause she loved Morvedd." "That's right, Bach. And when we lose something we love, we're never the same after, are we?" So, thank you.
Love the end.
Beautiful.
I mean, I love anything that has a bit of the folkloric influence in it there as well. And also, I'm very happy to finally know how you pronounce that. I won't try and say it back and mangle it, but
that was wonderful, Catherine. I could listen to you read the whole book. I love your reading style too. That was great.
Thank you. The thing is, when you live in Wales, you hate your accent, but other people seem to like it, so just get used to it.
I'm surrounded by those accents.
We're not too far from the border, so we get a few, and I love it. But I think wherever you are, your accent sounds too normal, and then you go away, and everyone's like, "Wow."
Yeah.
Going to the States, everyone's like, "Oh, say something in British for me."
Yeah.
And then I'm over here, and people say, "You don't sound very British." I'm like, whatever. But that was wonderful. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
So next up is, me. So I'm going to remember to change the screen this time because I've forgotten that before. There we go. So I am going to be reading from The Hiding, which does actually have a scene that takes place on Halloween, but it is the last chapter of the book. So it is impossible to read from without a whole ton of spoilers. So I'm going to be reading from a couple of weeks earlier in the year. And if you want to know what happens on Halloween, you'll have to go get the book. So this scene's about halfway through the book, and my main character Harper and her sister are investigating the death of someone who gives those ghost walk tours. And they have broken into the guild hall of the ghost walkers to try and find out some more about him and been caught. And they are being taken to the master undertaker. The cemetery was pitch black, but for the wavering light of the guard's torch. Even that thin beam of brightness didn't reassure Harper. Rather, it created more darkness, throwing long shadows behind each blade of grass. Darkness piled upon darkness, pressing in, consuming, suffocating. Clouds overpowered the moonlight as the stars twinkled out, handful by handful. Panic welled inside Harper, the sense of disconnect and loss the dark always summoned. wary of what could lurk between the gravestones, frozen, pretending to be stone, hiding behind edifices of death. It didn't matter that she didn't believe in ghosts. What mattered more was whether they believed in her. Grace took her hand, their fingers linked as they picked their way between tombstones. The guard prodded Harper with his baton. Don't tell us the Archbishop's lackeys are afraid of some wee ghosties. I thought you lot didn't believe in the undead. One of the men laughed, pushing Harper forward. Grace knocked his baton away with her free hand. Her knuckle dusters rung like funeral bells as metal struck metal. Harper fingered the hilt of the machete at her hip, not wanting to draw it on another human. It was likely she and Grace would win in a fight, even without weapons. Yet she didn't want to fight her own kind. I'm a witch who hunts supernaturals. Which side should I be on? Grace went ahead of her, arm reached back, fingers still entwined. She trod carefully, her usual swagger gone. Torchlight caught her spiked stilettos. Practicality was not a DeSantos watchword. We've been doing this too long, gotten too confident. Grace's heels sank into the grass, mud glistening as they ripped free. Focusing on the sparkle of light against patent leather, Harper tried to forget the crushing black above and the rotting dead below. Near the centre of the cemetery, the guard in front held up a hand. Harper's heart thudded in her chest, her breath heavy as though she'd run for miles. The man pointed to a white marble mausoleum, lit by floodlights to catch every intricately sculpted face and flower that adorned it. That's where we're going, ladies, he said. A pretty tomb for two pretty girls, if the Master Undertaker isn't satisfied with your story. Harper wasn't sure if the shiver down her back was her own, or a judder escaping from Grace's body into hers. You're a creep. Grace may have been trembling, but her voice was strong. Never show fear. That's what Gabriel, Grace's oldest brother, always said to them. Never show fear, no matter how dark it is, no matter how strong your enemy. Never show fear. But feel fear, Miguel, the next oldest, would chime in. Feel fear. It's God's warning. It keeps you alive. The guards should have felt more fear. When Grace gave Harper's hand a Morse code squeeze, she spun into action. Grabbing the end of the nightstick, Harper used the momentum of the man's swing to pull him off balance and topple him over her hip. A whimper came from behind her as Grace's knuckle dusters impacted vulnerable flesh. When Harper's rival tried to stand, she knocked him back with a swift kick to the solar plexus, leaving him gasping for breath on the ground. Grace's opponent lay curled in a fetal position, clutching his groin, emitting a high-pitched moan. The victor dusted off her hands with a self-satisfied smirk. Her family fought more than animalistic soups. They fought the humanoid ones too. The ones hiding in plain sight, who are as susceptible as anyone else to a swift kick between the legs. Hurt them, disable them, live to fight another day, Father DeSantos has said as they drilled in the garden. This is no honourable fight between gentlefolk. This is a fight for survival. Your survival and the survival of the innocents who depend on you. Fight dirty. Fight to win. Harper picked up the fallen torch, her palm so slick she almost dropped it. Despite Father's words, violence made her uneasy. Thank heaven for Grace, who wasn't scared of the dark, and who had no inhibitions about using whatever means necessary to get her own way. Grace casually poked one of the guards with the pointed toe of her shoe. He contorted his body away from her with a groan, but stayed down. Thank you so much for escorting us, she said. Such a polite introduction to your Master Undertaker. You've been such a gentleman. If either of you ever dares hit my sister again, you won't get away with a simple bruising. I'll break your sorry... Good evening, ladies. A disembodied voice interrupted Grace's tirade. It rolled through the air, mellow yet commanding, quiet yet overpowering. Both women instinctively turned to it. Harper swung the torch around, catching an apparition in its beam. It appeared as a man, black cloth against black night, so it was hard to judge his size or era. His feet did not deign to touch the ground. His black cloak billowed in an unfelt breeze. A stovepipe hat disappeared up into the darkness. Vapours clung to him with the desperate fingers of a jilted lover, grasping yet sliding off. Only his face was clearly visible, hanging suspended in the air like the man in the moon come down to earth. His skin was wrinkled yet timeless, creasing around his frown as though it knew no other expression. His eyes were black as his garments. Dilated pupils mocked the torchlight, irises expanded resentfully into white. Inhuman, ghostly, deadly. Harper's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes burned with sight as spirits escaped from the grave to stretch pleading hands toward him. Translucent and white, they thronged around him, some scornful, some fawning. Their whispers carried on the winds, too many to count, too many to hear their words, a susurration building to the crescendo of a waterfall, plummeting, falling. Harper heard one voice through the crowd, one far-off person calling her name. Then there was nothing but darkness. And that is from The Hiding.
Lovely. Well done. Well done, Thea.
Thank you.
Love that.
Brilliant.
I want to go on a
Yeah.
ghost walk.
Yeah, totally.
If you are ever in York, you literally cannot walk more than about a block without running into someone who is selling them. They
Yeah.
don't call them ghost walkers. I couldn't find a name, so I made one up. But they're all there just doing their ghost tours. So
Yeah, my youngest is going up tomorrow. And they're intending to do a walk. Oh,
they can report back for us then.
yeah.
I love those two characters, Grace and Harper, just brilliant. Follow them or anywhere.
I love the fact
You probably don't want to follow them anywhere. It's likely to be dangerous.
True story. From afar.
So next up, we have Kev. So over to you.
Cool. Yeah. Hi, I'm Kev Harrison. Thanks very much for checking this evening out if you're watching, or if you're watching afterwards as well. I'm going to be reading from Shadow of the Hidden, which is my first novel. It's about a jinn. It's set in the Middle East. So I'm going to be reading a bit from chapter 2, where the main character, Seb, is going to visit someone to try and get some help for his friend who's been cursed by a rather nasty jinn. So here we go. Hope you like it. The car zipped forward and swept onto the main coastal road, the tyres just giving the faintest hint of a squeal as we veered across 2 lanes of traffic to the fast lane. Horns blasted at us in a variety of tones and intensities. I clutched the handle above me. First time Istanbul, the taxi driver laughed. No, I've been here many times. Just never get used to the driving. He chuckled again. Everyone is crazy. Inshallah, we get to university with no big crash. I closed my eyes and released a slow breath. When I opened them again, I saw Oz grinning in the rearview mirror. I turned to him. Your face, he said. Not even a little bit worried? He shrugged his shoulders. You should have seen the military drivers on the mountain roads. I never prayed so much in my life. I turned back to face front and marvelled at the chaos. Which specialist you see? The taxi driver asked as he undertook a dilapidated city bus and swerved back in. Professor Yilmaz. I've done some work for her before, but never met in person. Don't know, but which department? Where I drop you? Ah, sorry. Antiquities and religion. It's one of the older buildings, I think. I know, yes. I gazed out across the Bosphorus at the densely packed, tan-coloured apartment buildings on the eastern shore, with the occasional dome shimmering at the head of a palace or mosque. Ferries chugged along, smaller pleasure boats darting between them. Huge cargo ships sailed at an almost glacial pace north towards their destinations on the Black Sea. Here, the taxi driver said, pointing as the car shuddered down the exit ramp, stopping at a set of traffic lights. The old Universitesi. I glanced at my watch and saw we'd made good time, despite Oz's flight delay. We wound our way uphill from the coast and into the university's main parking area. The car came to a stop at the taxi drop-off point. Perfect, thank you, I said, and opened my door. One moment, the taxi driver said, leaning over. Yes? Not you. You! He looked up at Oz, already out of the car and on the pavement. The driver's eyes were clouded. You should talk to Scylla, while you still can. Oz lunged towards the car, bundling me to one side. What did you say? The taxi driver shifted into gear and burst forward. Oz sprinted after him, screaming in Turkish. The man reached out, even as the car turned 180 degrees, slamming the door shut, then raced from the car park, narrowly avoiding a truck as he hit the main road. Oz ambled back to me, fists clenching and unclenching. What's happening with Scylla? I said, trying to remain calm. It was in him. What was? The djinn. How did he know her name otherwise? A lucky guess? It's not such an uncommon name. Oz, what's happening with Scylla? I asked again. Nothing, as far as I know. She'll be at school now. Let's get through this meeting and I'll call and check on her while she's having lunch. We made our way into the domed Ottoman-style building and began to climb the curved marble staircase. Indentations in each step, recalling many thousands of footfalls, revealed the structure's age. Arriving at the third floor, we pushed through the heavy door into antiquities. An administrator looked up at us from behind a computer screen at the desk as we entered. He greeted us warmly in Turkish. Oz stepped forward and explained we were here to see the professor, and he immediately switched to English. Dr. Mackey? Not doctor, no. The PhD. Well, it's a long story. Mr. Mackey, then, he said. He outstretched a hand enthusiastically, which I shook. Can I get you both some tea? I waved away his offer. I don't think so. This is pretty urgent, and I'm sure the professor is very busy. Judging by the resources she's been requesting ahead of your meeting, she must be. Come with me. He moved out from behind his desk and led us down the corridor, past a series of closed doors, until we reached Professor Yilmaz's office. He knocked gently. Evet, said a firm, enthusiastic voice, almost immediately. I have Mr. Mackey here to see you. The door burst inward, and Professor Yilmaz stood there in the doorway, wearing a plain turtleneck under denim dungarees, hair in loose, energetic black curls. Hi, she said, with an American-sounding twang. Come in. She stepped aside and gestured theatrically in the style of a doorman, allowing Oz and I into the room. Thanks, Emre. If I need anything, I'll call your desk. Emre nodded and backed out, allowing the door to close behind him. Sit, please sit. Did Emre offer you both tea? She said, as she rounded her desk and lowered herself into her seat. He did, yes. I think we're okay for now, I said, and sat. Her desk was littered with books in various positions, all of them ornately decorated, calligraphy in shimmering metallic inks, spines threaded with gold leaf. She clicked and scrolled with her mouse. The screen turned away from us, then stopped. Okay then, here we are. She twisted the screen around to face us. This is a list of all known curses which are in use that involve the djinn. Oz? It is Oz, isn't it? Oz made an affirmative sound. Great, Oz, can you remember the words this old woman used when she spoke to you? My friend cleared his throat. I can. I remember all, every word. Do you recognize the words from any of these on the screen? She zoomed in, making the calligraphy bolder, clearer. Oz shook his head. I didn't go to mosque in years. Okay, then just recite it for me, slowly, and I'll try to transcribe. He cleared his throat again, his eyes shifting upward as he focused. Then he began to recite the curse. Stop, 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 stop. Yilmaz was out of her chair, scooping back her hair in her hands and breathing out a long sigh. Not that one. Yet not that one. Excuse my language. She began to pick up and close the books from the desk in front of her, stacking them to one side. What does it mean? Why are you so spooked? I said. Yilmaz sat back in her chair. Sebastian, she said, when I said this list was of all the curses in use, that's exactly what I meant. There are some curses, mainly those involving the ghoul, which are not in use, as in no one uses them. Please call me Seb, I said. Why are they not in use, as you put it? Her face twisted into a smile that was anything but happy. To me, it was all rage, packaged in sarcasm. When I studied in the US on my undergrad, I was amazed by all the girls in my boarding house. Their talk of Ouija boards, Bloody Mary, all that stuff. But later I thought about it. Why do people do that kind of stuff? I mean, what's the risk? She paused, eyes boring into mine. I glanced over at Oz. He too was staring at me. Are you asking me? I said. Mm-hmm. Well, how should I know? I haven't done any of that stuff, ever. Aha, and why? Why didn't you? Because I swallowed, glanced at Oz again. Because what if something does happen? Why would I risk it? She leaned across the table, her curly hair bouncing exaggeratedly as she did so. But the risk is calculated. They don't believe anything's going to happen. Not really. It's the same with these. She sat back up and tapped the top of the PC monitor. No one believes in these. It's why they're written down. They're like the boogeyman, for scaring naughty kids. This, she pointed at Oz, this thing with your goats, this is used with intent. To harm. Maybe worse. Oz's phone blasted loudly to life from his pocket. He slipped it out and glanced at the name. Enes, his brother. Worse, he said, and left the small office, pulling the door quietly shut behind him, mumbling into the phone. A moment of silence passed between the professor and I until I decided to break it. I was really hoping you'd be able to calm him down. Yilmaz unscrewed a water bottle at the side of the computer and refilled her glass, taking a sip. I'm not a therapist, nor a cheerleader. If you didn't want the truth, perhaps you shouldn't have come to see me. I stroked my chin for a moment, thinking about how to respond. You're an expert, but you don't believe in this stuff, do you? Not really. Seb, you sent me that photo. I'm aware of this type of curse, but have never, ever seen or heard of it in reality. There has to be some other explanation. Oh, yes? How long and how many men would you need to do that to more than a dozen goats? I didn't respond. At this moment, this is the simplest explanation. So, supposing it is a jinn, a ghoul, as you called it, what do we do? What are the next steps? She stood and walked over to a filing cabinet, pulling open a creaking drawer. The easiest way is to find this widow, ask her to retract the curse. If she's in contact with the ghoul, you should be looking at burial grounds, swamps, places where there have been mass deaths or burials. Failing that, you could talk to this guy. She handed me a paper in a plastic sleeve. I scanned the details. Kairouan, Tunisia. Unless you fancy smuggling yourself into Mecca, she made a neck-slicing gesture. He's the best expert I know of on Islamic exorcism, expelling of jinn, all that projectile vomit-related stuff. It took me a moment to realize my mouth was gaping. Not really, Dangalak. I laughed at the insult and the fact that she articulated it so much better than I ever could. The door opened and Oz walked in. His face was dry, but his cheeks bore the streaks of tears. I stood. Hey, are you okay, man? It's Sula. She collapsed at school. Is she in hospital? A coma. I have to go. I'm coming with you, I said, folding the paper with the contact details of the Tunisian cleric into my shoulder bag. I turned back to the professor. Professor Yilmaz, thank you so much for your time. She reached her hand across for Oz and then to me to shake. It's my pleasure, really. I'd love you to both keep me posted. You have my email, and my cell number is in my email signature. She moved to the office door, pulling it open. Good luck, Oz. I hope Sila is okay. And call me Dennis, please. My mother is Dennis, also. Teshakura Darim. We thanked Emre again on our way out and then hurried to the building on the main road. Oz began trying to hail cabs from a bus stop. What happened with Scylla? What's wrong with her? I said. He moved back to me, half an eye on the traffic, and his thumb still out into the road. She just collapsed. Enes said she's normal, everything normal except the brainwaves. Flat, like a deep sleep. So sorry, man. A taxi slowed and signalled that it was stopping. We hurried over, and Oz opened the door. You know, it isn't necessarily related, I said. Oz stared at me. Fucking wake up, he said, and got in, slamming the door shut. And stopped there.
Well done, Kev.
Leaving us on a cliffhanger there as well. Very good. I love the lore that's creeping in there. I'm looking forward to reading the rest because it is high on my to-be-read pile.
Thank you.
It's been many months since I read it, Kev, and I still remember the vast majority of it, which I always think is a good sort of test of how much a book sticks with you. So well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I remember it too. Actually, I've been lucky so far that I think I've read all the books that have been told
Yeah.
behind the scenes. But yeah, missed the food report in that one though. No food in that one, Kev.
Yeah.
I didn't put any food in because I wasn't sure if people had had dinner, so I didn't want to be a thing.
Yeah, people who are on US time might just be sitting down to eat. So there you go. There's a warning for everybody. Don't eat while reading Kev's book. So next up we have Rae. Just for clarity, I will confirm her debut came out under Rae Knowles' The Stradivarius with Bridges Gate, as well as the novella Merciless Waters. But today she's going to be reading from, is it the latest one to come out or just about to come out, Rae?
This one, just about to come out.
And that's through Clash Books.
This one's actually through Off Limits, but you didn't
have so many
Thank you
things.
so much. So I'm Rae Wilde. Thank you so much for mentioning that. I have also published under the name Rae Knowles. But what I'm going to read from today is I Do Not Apologize for My Position on Men, which is a collection of short horror stories, mostly feminist horror. There's a lot of erotic horror in here, which made selecting something to read in public a bit challenging. But we did it. It comes out on November 23rd. So yeah, and it's available for pre-order. This particular story is called Gemma Prepared to Dive, and it's one of the original stories in the collection. So it's not been previously published. September 7th. Once again, I find myself facing the chatter of birds before dawn, but rather than woken, I've not yet slept. Journal, I must slow my hand, for I have such news to share. As promised, I set into the jungle following my last entry with naught but a vague sense of intuition. What was it Mother used to say? A woman's gut is her only source of truth. And I suppose once again she was right, for I needed no map, nor path, nor view of guiding stars. I walked for what must have been hours. Worldly light faded. The oppressive closeness of damp air turned from welcome respite from the day's heat to a lurid chill. Any fear I might have held of being lost, of being attacked by some feral animal, of any other calamity that might befall a woman alone, was chased away by insistent knowing. Onward I walked, and walked, and walked. Skin goosed, ankles chafed by unruly foliage. Glimmers of a shining moon were my only companion, and yet I felt less alone than I have in such time. I then heard the distant roar of water on water and stone. Through a thicket of wide tropical leaves, I spotted the cove and the waterfall feeding therein. In the dark, in the black, I sensed her there. This sensing, this knowing, drew me to the water's edge. I gazed into the depths, first seeing only a reflection of myself by starlight, but then journal, then a flash. Ashen hair made translucent by clear water. Becca, I called out to her, but she moved so quickly, more like a fish than a woman. I despaired that she might not possibly hear me, not over the roaring water. Becca, I called again and again, I've come, I'm here. And at last, in the place where the deluge poured into the cove, her head broke the surface. The waterline lapped under her nose, and those lilac eyes, I could have sworn they were lilac, seemed to glow like firebugs. I removed my shoes. Mossy stones slick beneath my bare sole as I stepped forward, wishing deeply to join her in the water. But as the coolness licked my toes, Becca gave a curt shake of her head, and I understood that she wished me to come no closer. I was reminded then of the skittish cat my uncle kept, and how it would run if I pursued, but would draw closer if I merely sat and practiced patience. So I settled upon the stone, keeping perfectly still, and hoped she would move toward me, that she would come close enough that I could explain, ask her forgiveness. Long moments passed. She watched, unmoving, draped in spray from the cascading falls. In my waiting, a spider with legs like spindles crept onto my calf. His thin arms grasped the meat of my leg, and I suppressed the impulse to swat him away. My persistence was fruitful. Becca lurched forward as if pushing off some unseen rock, gliding toward me, black ripples fanning out behind her like she was some cunning eel. When she was close enough to hear a soft murmur, I said, "I love you." Still, her mouth remained below water, but her gaze softened, and I detected some sadness there, some longing which mirrored my own. I again moved to join her in the water, but again she tipped her jaw, and I took it as disapproval. I stopped, but closer to the water as I was, I caught the image of her below. Shredded flesh billowed with the water's movement around white bone. I glanced back to her face, bursting with life, and then back to her body below, rotting. Becca nodded. I should have felt revulsion. My lover decomposed before me. I should have been overcome with grief, for surely only the dead may rot, but journal. I felt only longing to cradle the flayed pieces of her, to run my fingers between her ribbons of flesh, to kiss her mouth, whether I find succulent lips or grizzled sinew. I prepared myself to dive. Whatever fate found Becca, let it find me too, I thought. Perhaps the void attempted to swallow her, but got stuck in the chewing. No sooner did the thought prompt my body to move than Becca beat me to the notion, diving herself into the unseen depths. I waited, journal. Waited and waited. I called to her, then screamed myself hoarse. But Becca did not return to me. Not even the spider deigned to keep me company in my hysteria. So I made my way back to Mallory and Tim's, all the while considering the great void, the black leather book, my lover's decay. I pondered the diving bell spider, crafting an unlikely home beneath the surface, trapping a bubble of air within its web. I must return to the book, to search its pages for some right to return Becca to me in her truest form. I must listen closely at tonight's service. I must implore Mallory to talk to me if I can. I am too close, journal. I feel the breath of the void at my back. And if love can snatch a woman from its jaw, then mine will salvage Becca.
It's beautiful, Rae. Really was lovely. I had Edgar Allan Poe vibes then.
Thank you.
Very gothic.
Lovely.
That combination of beauty and grotesque,
Yeah.
it just works so well.
Yeah.
Gonna say
I
I
love the
love
language.
imagery.
The language in that was
Lovely.
beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, thank you all so
Grotesque
much.
is kind of your specialty, I think. I mean, I've been following Gemma and Becca for a while now because their short stories have popped up in a few publications. So it's very exciting to see they have a whole collection now and some new ones.
Thank you so much. Yeah, part 2 of the collection is called The Many Lives of Becca and Jem. So I've collected all my stories about them, and they're all in there. So it's good to have them together.
It is. It's been fun watching them grow through these different lives.
Thank you.
So last up, and by no means least, we have Katie Marie.
Yes. Hello. As everyone else has already said, thank you everyone for joining us. This evening, I will be reading from my first novella, which is A Man in Winter, and tells the story of Arthur. It is a story of love, grief, and loss. The loss of our loved ones, but also the loss of ourselves, be it to supernatural entities or to unfortunate illness such as dementia, which is something that Art is suffering from. I'll be reading from fairly early on in the book because the further in you get, the more spoilery it gets. So this is from chapter 2. I was sore when I woke up. It took several long minutes of gentle movement before I could convince my fingers to loosen up enough to let go of Molly's dressing gown, and even longer for me to sit up. The dressing gown was the one she had died in. My hands shook as I let go of it, and it fell to the floor. I thought they had destroyed it. Sophie had told me that they had thrown it away. What was it doing here? Where had it come from? My bones creaked as I rocked to my feet, and they were still creaking as I shuffled into the kitchen and switched the kettle on. I glanced at the sink and noticed that there seemed to be more dishes than I remembered using waiting to be washed. I'd deal with them later. The stiffness had eased a little by the time I reached the living room, tea in hand. I put the tea on the windowsill and picked up my grabber, another gift from Sophie that had, much to my annoyance, turned out to be rather useful. It was a simple device, a stick with a claw on one end that I could operate from the other. I headed back to the bedroom where the dressing gown was on the floor. The grabber made picking up the gown easy. Lord knows without it I would have had to wait several hours for my back to ease up enough to bend down that far. Even then, there was never a guarantee I'd make it back to my feet by myself. I had, until my diagnosis, thought that the worst part of getting old was the fact that I struggled to get up and down by myself. Suffice to say that the betrayal of my mind was much worse. The strong possibility that when I myself passed away, I wouldn't even know who the people at my bedside were was far worse than having a bad back. I went back to the living room and stood by the window, taking my tea in hand. I looked out at the front garden and wondered again how Molly's dressing gown had turned up in my bedroom. You should plant hydrangeas, like we had at the cottage. I almost dropped the dressing gown again as I turned behind me. Molly was sitting on the sofa, relaxed and smiling as if she'd spent the morning sitting there watching me faff about making tea. I always loved the hydrangeas, she smiled at me. You should get blue ones. All right, I said, staring at her, my hands still shaking. This was another hallucination. I'd had them all the time after Molly had died. The medication stopped them. Had I forgotten to take my pills again? My heart stuttered when I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had taken my pills. I bet if you ask Mike, he'll be happy to plant them in for you. To suddenly see her again, so relaxed, not reliving that terrible night, it made my chest tight. She looked alive and happy, chatting to me about flowers. I coughed, trying to shift the lump that had formed in my throat. Art, she said. I looked up, noting that she was wearing her dressing gown, the same one that I was holding, but now my hands were empty and the blood was gone from the cloth. Are you all right? Fine, I swallowed. It's really good to see you. Well, I'm glad you think so, Molly laughed. I haven't had time to tidy myself up yet today. You look beautiful, I said. My vision blurred and I blinked away tears. Art, you're an old fool. She looked around the living room. I like your new home. When I had had visions of Molly in the past, she had never really interacted with the surrounding world. It was something that Dr. Wakefield had told me to pay attention to help convince me that she wasn't real, that it was my broken mind trying to trick me. But here she was, commenting on the new bungalow. Her weight dented the sofa cushions, and her hair moved in the draft coming from the kitchen. I paused when I noticed that something was off. Molly's skin was grey. She was pale, but not the pale of illness. She was actually grey. Molly noticed me staring and put her hand up to her face. You do? I tried distracting her from my staring. Oh, yes, it's small, but it's perfect. Has everything you could need. Sophie spent a lot of time trying to find you somewhere nice and close to her and Mike. I think she did marvellously. Molly beamed at me. How could this be happening? Molly couldn't really be here. It had to be the mist medication. The draught carried with it the smell of her perfume, and I had to close my eyes against it. Art, did you hear me? Yep. Sophie's a wonderful kid. I opened my eyes. Oh, she takes after her dad, taking care of everyone. Molly looked like she wanted to say more, but her smile faded and she looked away as if she couldn't quite meet my gaze. What is it, sweetheart? I leaned forward, all thoughts of Molly being real or not vanishing for a moment. I knew that look well. Something was upsetting her. Arthur? Something was wrong if she was calling me Arthur. I hate this. I hate that I've tried so hard for so long to get to you to see me. But now that I'm here, and rather than take a moment to actually talk to you, I need you to do something for me. What? I need you to... No, I mean, what is happening? How are you here? Why now? How can I be sure this isn't just my mind? That's a lot of questions. Molly slumped a little, her shoulders dipping. You can't be surprised, love. No, I suppose not. I'll try and answer them. She took a deep breath. I never left you, Art. My heart stuttered, making my breath catch. I've always been here with you. You just couldn't see me until now. But why? Why now? Why not before? I went to reach out, but couldn't bring myself to completely close the distance between us. I don't know. I think it might have been the medication that the doctor put you on, but I can't be sure. Just know that I would never leave you willingly, and that's why I need you now. I wanted you to see me sooner, to have time for us to talk about how much I've missed you, but I can't. Time is running out for me. I need your help. How can I even believe this? I turned away. Concentrating, I took several deep breaths and tried to focus on the things I knew were real. The view out the window, the cup in my hand, it was smooth and warm. These things were real. I turned back to the sofa, half expecting Molly to be gone. She wasn't. I don't know what to say to make you believe me. She reached out, offering her hand to me. Putting the cup back on the windowsill, I stepped forward and took her hand. She was cold. Her skin was dry and fragile, feeling like it might come apart under a gentle pressure. I flinched back and let go. I need to take my medication. I turned and headed up to the bathroom. My hand shook as I opened the medicine cupboard. The box of pills felt unreasonably heavy when I picked them up. How many had I missed? Did I mean to stop taking them? No, of course not. I popped a capsule out of the foil. Arthur! Molly was behind me. I could see her reflected in the mirror. She looked so real. I had felt her skin under my hand, the same way I had felt the cup I'd been holding. Arthur, please don't. I don't have time for you to stop seeing me. I need you now. She was crying. Milky white tears fell down her face. I had made her cry. I was frightening her, trying to abandon her again, just like I had on the night she died. I put the pills back into the cupboard. Ta-da.
Thank you, Katie. And finishing off nicely there with possibly a ghost. You have to read more to find out. So thank you to everyone who has joined us for the readings this evening, and to anyone watching later, and especially to StephanieEllis, Catherine McCarthy, Kev Harrison, Rae Wilde and Katie Marie for reading. If you want to read more of any of the books you've heard tonight, then there are links in the chat and attached to the video. And also you can find most of us on Twitter, Instagram or TikTok. We're all on one of them. So if you've seen any of the adverts for tonight, you'll have seen the handles to come and follow us as well.
Sure.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Alethea, for inviting us as well.
Yes, very much.